What's going on, everybody? In this segment of our trip navigation series, we're going to take everything we've talked about in the previous segments and put them into practice and actually go through the steps of planning a trip and calculating a final budget. So the steps we're going to go through is, first, we're going to look at the window of time we have for our trip. Then we're going to look at the location where we're going to take the trip. Then we're going to look at the fuel. Then we're going to look at where we're going to be camping and how we're going to break the trip down into different days. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with looking at the food and the overall final budget. So the first part of this planning process is figuring out the window of time that you have for your trip. So I'm going to plan basically a long weekend trip. So Sasquatch and I are going to play hooky on Friday. Matt's probably not going to miss us anyway. We're going to travel for the weekend. We'll play hooky on Monday, and then we're going to drive back Monday night. So we're gonna take a 4-day weekend. That's probably easily doable for most people. So the second part is to figure out where can you go in that time. So for us, we look down here at the map. We're here in Bedford, Virginia, where Blue Ridge Overland Gear is. And of course, this is the Mid-Atlantic Backcountry Discovery Route. So this would actually be a nice trip that we could probably do in that 4-day weekend window. All right, now the third part is to figure out fuel. Fuel is probably the biggest variable for the length of your trip, how far you can travel at any given time. So for me, my Jeep being a 2004 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited, towing a trailer, I get roughly 10 miles to the gallon, but I have a 31-gallon fuel tank, which gives me a working range of about 300 miles. So that's gonna be my first kind of piece of information that I'm gonna stick over here is 10 miles per gallon, 31-gallon tank, about a 300 to 310 mile range. So that's the first variable. So the next thing is to calculate the overall mileage for the trip. So we're here in Bedford, Virginia. The BDR starts down here in Damascus. So by doing a little bit of research on Google Maps, I know that that's 158 miles. Now, if I look over here on the guide to the BDR GPS tracks, it's broken down by section and it actually gives you the number of miles per section. So I'm gonna plan on doing section 1, section 2, and section 3. Section 1's 138 miles, section 2 is 79 miles, section 3 is 193 miles. Now section 3 ends up here in Moorefield, West Virginia, which is about even with Front Royal, Virginia, which is the start of Shenandoah National Park and the northern edge of Skyline Drive. And for me, I think it'd be really cool if I went up the BDR, I could jump over to Front Royal and I could drive home via Skyline Drive and the Blue Ridge Parkway, which brings me back to Bedford. And again, doing a little bit of digging around on Google Maps, I know that that section from Moorefield to Bedford via Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive is gonna be about 230 miles, which gives me a grand total of about 798 miles. Now, the next piece that we want to do is we want to figure out how we're going to break the trip up into the number of days. So we got 4 days to work with. Now, me personally, I don't like to travel more than 100 to 150 miles per day when I'm doing an overland trip because I like to stop and I like to hike, I like to explore, maybe check out a museum or something like that. So now we can start breaking this whole trip down into smaller chunks. So our trip is going to begin Friday morning here in Bedford. And we know this first leg from Bedford to Damascus is 158 miles, but that's going to be all highway driving. So realistically, that's only going to take us 2.5, 3 hours tops. So that's probably going to be our morning. So we'll get down here to Damascus around lunchtime. And then that gives us all of Friday afternoon to start on section 1. Now, the nice thing about the BDR maps is that they have the full route, but then they also have it broken down by section. So when we start looking here along the route, we actually see they have little tent icons for different campgrounds and stuff like that. One of the other resources that we can use along with this is the iOverlander app, which is also integrated with devices like the Garmin Overlander, which is a great way to find wild campsites. So if we think, hey, you know, Friday night's gonna be a wild camp night, we'll just kind of mark that and that'll put us somewhere here along the first section. All right, so Saturday morning we'll be starting here at our wild campsite about midway through section 1. And realistically, probably all day Saturday, we could do the rest of section 1 and all of section 2 since it's a short section. And that's gonna bring us up here near Covington. And right near Covington is where Douthit State Park is. So that would be a really great location that we can camp at. And again, when we start looking at using devices in the next section, we'll be able to actually use the Garmin Overlander or some of our other apps like Gaia GPS to actually navigate to these locations and along the route. So we'll get in a little bit more detail on that later. Now, this is going to be our campsite Saturday night. So Sunday we'll continue on and do the bulk of section 3, which is this long one. That brings us up here to Moorfield. And that's where we get up into the West Virginia and Seneca Rocks area. So that might be another good idea to, again, use the iOverlander app or the Garmin Overlander to find and navigate to a campsite. But we also have some other resources like the Monongahela map and the Purple Lizard maps that we talked about before that would be great for finding some things to do in this area. Now, Monday morning, we'll be starting here at Seneca, kind of near Moorfield, and then that's when we're just going to transition over to Front Royal, jump on Skyline Drive through Shenandoah National Park, then onto the Blue Ridge Parkway at Afton, come all the way down and finish at Bedford Monday night. All right, now that we have our trip broken down in the number of days, now we can figure out what our food budget is going to be. So we know it's going to be a 4-day trip, 3 meals a day, that's a total of 12 meals, but you can kind of figure gonna eat breakfast Friday morning before you leave, so you don't have to worry about that. And you're probably gonna eat dinner when you get home, so that takes out 2 meals. And then the decision is really up to you. Are you gonna wanna eat breakfast every morning in camp, eat lunch, pack it yourself, or do you wanna stop somewhere and eat along the way? And then the same thing for dinner. Are you gonna wanna eat at camp or do you wanna stop somewhere along the way? Really, it's up to you. For me, I like to do a working budget of about $20 to $25 per day for food, which kind of puts me in the $100 to $150 range if I'm gonna, splurge, and Sasquatch and I are gonna get a couple little adult brewskis for around the fire or something like that. So now that we kind of can figure that out, we can start looking at totaling up our full budget. So for food, $25 a day, we're looking again 100, 150 max. So now let's figure out fuel. So we know the total trip length is 798 miles. And again, previously we calculated out the fuel mileage. So I know I'm gonna need about 80 gallons worth of gas. And the resource I like to use is Gas Buddy, the gasbuddy.com app. And that's gonna give me that the average fuel costs in the area range from $1.73 to $1.85. So if I do a little bit of math, I calculate my total fuel budget is gonna be about $147. So I can take that $147 of fuel plus about $100 to $125 for my food. And if I'm gonna camp at someplace like Douthit State Park and I gotta pay a camping fee there, I can roughly estimate that the whole trip is probably gonna cost me about $300 for the whole weekend. So that kind of wraps up the 5 steps to planning a trip. So in the next segment, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually go out into the vehicle and get ready to go and show you how we use things like the Garmin Overlander, Gaia GPS, iOverlander, and those sorts of things to actually navigate. And let's stop talking about it and let's go do it. All right, Sasquatch, let's go.